In Lagos, where wealth shines brighter than morals, there lived a man everyone admired, or at least pretended to. His name was Chief Adewale. By the time he turned 42, he had everything a Lagos businessman could desire. A mansion on Banana Island with marble floors that gleamed under imported chandeliers, a fleet of cars that roared with pride each time the engines came alive, and a reputation for closing deals no other man could. Yet, what truly defined him in the eyes of society was not his business acumen or his philanthropy, but his appetite for women. It began innocently, or so he believed. In his 20s, Adewale was handsome and magnetic. Women flocked to him naturally, charmed by his wit and the scent of success that clung to him like expensive cologne. By the time his fortunes grew, temptation had become a constant companion. What was once the occasional flirtation evolved into an insatiable habit. He chased women everywhere: restaurants in Victoria Island, nightclubs in Lekki, high-profile weddings in Ikoyi, even sliding into the inboxes of fresh university graduates on Instagram. To the outside world, Adewale was the quintessential Lagos big man, handsome, wealthy, and desired. He was the one younger men envied and older men wished they could emulate. But beneath the glittering surface, there was something darker, an emptiness he filled with women, only to find it growing larger with every conquest. At home, there was Olifunk, his wife of 15 years. She was graceful, elegant, and carried herself with the quiet dignity of a woman who had seen both the rise and the rot of her husband. In the early years, she had endured his flirtations with a heavy heart, convincing herself that he would outgrow them once business responsibilities consumed him. But Adewale never outgrew them. Instead, he expanded them. It was no longer whispers she could brush off. It became public humiliation. Women called the house at odd hours. Perfume scents lingered on his shirts. Drivers exchanged knowing glances when they picked up strange ladies. And social media, cruel and unrelenting, didn't help. She would scroll past posts of young girls flaunting handbags and wigs that she knew her husband had bought. Olifunk stopped asking questions. She stopped crying too. One day she looked at him across the dining table, surrounded by their children, and said nothing. Silence became her language, and silence hurt far more than her tears ever had. Adewale had 3 children, 2 boys and a girl. They adored him once. In their eyes, he had been larger than life, the father who could make anything possible. Birthdays were grand events with clowns, cakes taller than the children themselves, and gifts they could barely lift. But as they grew, they began to notice things. They noticed the way their mother's eyes grew sadder with each passing year. They noticed the hushed arguments behind closed doors. They noticed when their father failed to show up at school events, sending chauffeurs instead. One evening, his eldest son, barely 16, confronted him. "Daddy, why do you keep hurting Mummy?" The words stung, but Adewale brushed them aside with laughter. "You won't understand now, but when you're older, you will see that life is complicated." But the boy did understand. They all did. And slowly, they began to drift away from him, choosing their mother's quiet presence over his noisy extravagance. Despite the cracks forming at home, Adewale felt untouchable outside. His friends praised his lifestyle. They clinked glasses of champagne with him in luxury lounges and called him Baba for the girls. Younger men approached him for advice on making money, secretly hoping they too could live as he did, surrounded by beauty and excess. He believed this was respect. He believed this was power. Every weekend, his mansion turned into a palace of pleasure. Music thumped from hidden speakers, bottles of champagne popped like gunfire, and young women in designer dresses filled the rooms. He called it networking. In truth, it was a parade of vanity. The girls came willingly. To them, Adewale was a ticket, designer handbags, vacations in Dubai, nights at 5-star hotels. They didn't love him, but they performed love well enough for him to believe it. And he didn't mind paying for the illusion. At night, as Lagos lights twinkled beyond the lagoon, he often stood on his balcony with a glass of cognac in hand, smiling at the empire he had built. His wife's silence, his children's distance, none of it seemed to matter. He was Chief Adewale, the man every woman wanted. Or so he thought. Yet, even in the height of his pleasure, shadows began to creep in. One night, after a lavish party, he found himself surrounded by laughter. A young woman was dancing for him. Two others leaned on his arms, whispering promises of passion. But for the first time, the laughter around him felt thin, artificial, bought. He excused himself and walked into his study. Alone, he poured another drink and stared at the family portraits on the wall. His wife's face, framed in a smile from years ago, seemed to watch him with quiet judgment. His children, captured in their innocent youth, reminded him of a time when he had been more than this. For a fleeting second, Adewale felt the weight of his choices pressing down on him. But then, the music from the party called him back, and he drowned the moment in more champagne. Still, Adewale convinced himself he was living the dream. "You only live once," he often told himself, repeating the line to silence the small, nagging voice of guilt. His body was still strong, his wealth still abundant, and his name still celebrated in social circles. To him, lust was not sin. Lust was power. Lust was proof that he was alive, desired, and needed. But what Adewale could not see was how quickly time was moving. He believed the sweetness of youth would last forever. He believed the women would always flock to him, that money would always pour in, that his children would one day understand. He did not see the storm gathering on the horizon. For now, he was still the man who chased every woman. And he was still proud of it. The cracks began quietly. Like fine lines on an expensive mirror, they were almost invisible at first. But with time, they deepened, spreading across every part of Adewale's life until the reflection he once admired so much was no longer recognizable. Olifunk had endured enough. 15 years of silence, humiliation, and betrayal had eroded the love she once carried for her husband. She no longer argued when he came home late, no longer checked his shirts for lipstick stains, no longer called his phone when he disappeared for days. Her silence was not acceptance, it was detachment. One morning, while Adewale was still asleep after another night of revelry, she packed her bags. Not in anger, but in calm determination. She folded her clothes, gathered her jewelry, and tucked away the last remnants of her pride. Her children helped her quietly, none of them asking questions. They had all seen this day coming. By the time Adewale woke up, his wife was gone. There was no note, no goodbye, just silence. First he laughed. "She'll be back. Where will she go? She cannot leave this house, this life I gave her." But she did not return. And for the first time, Adewale felt something foreign, fear. With Olifunk gone, Adewale expected his children to remain by his side. After all, he was their father, the provider, the one who had given them everything money could buy. But children are not swayed by wealth when love is absent. Calls went unanswered. Messages were left unread. His eldest son blocked his number entirely. His daughter, who once clung to him as a little girl, now looked at him with disdain when they crossed paths. He tried bribery, cars, gadgets, holidays abroad. But the children wanted none of it. They wanted a father who respected their mother, who had protected the sanctity of their home. That man no longer existed. One afternoon, in desperation, he drove to his son's university to surprise him. The boy walked out of class, saw his father waiting by the car, and turned around without a word. The rejection cut deeper than any insult. Adewale returned to his mansion that night and drank himself into a haze. Surrounded by luxury, he felt poorer than he ever had. The streets of Lagos are never silent, and gossip travels faster than cars on Third Mainland Bridge. For years, Adewale had been celebrated, the businessman with endless charm and endless women. But the same society that cheered him began to mock him. Business associates whispered about his recklessness. Younger men once eager to emulate him now laughed behind his back. "He's losing focus," they said. "His empire is cracking because of women." Parties, he was no longer the star of the show. Younger billionaires with sharper suits and fresher faces stole the attention. Adewale became a cautionary tale, not an inspiration. The respect he had built over decades eroded quietly, leaving behind only the hollow title of chief. A man who had everything but was losing it all. But Adewale refused to see the signs. He doubled down, clinging to the only thing that made him feel alive: women. Even as his hair turned gray and his face sagged with age, he continued the chase. University girls no longer swooned at his presence. They saw him for what he was: an aging sponsor. His money was their only attraction. He did not care. He still filled his nights with laughter that wasn't real and bodies that did not love him. He paid for companionship, mistaking it for affection. He paid for smiles, mistaking them for admiration. Yet deep down, a quiet shame began to grow. He noticed it when he walked into clubs. The stares had changed. Once they looked at him with envy. Now they looked at him with pity, or worse, amusement. He was the old man trying to keep up with the young. A man desperately pretending he was still 25. Still he chased. Because without the women he had nothing left. His mansion, once the center of endless parties, began to lose its crowd. Friends stopped coming around, tired of the same routine. The women rotated in and out, none of them staying long enough to leave a mark. He tried to drown the silence with music, turning up the speakers until the glass windows rattled. But music without joy is just noise, and every song reminded him of what he had lost. He walked through the vast halls at night, the marble floors echoing with each step. He remembered when those halls were filled with his children's laughter, when Olifunk decorated for Christmas with lights and garlands. Now the house smelled only of alcohol and stale perfume. It was no longer a home. It was a cage. One night, after another round of empty partying, Adewale returned to his study. He sat at his desk, surrounded by bottles and cigarette smoke, and stared at the family portraits on the wall. His wife's smile haunted him. His children's innocence mocked him. He picked up one of the frames, wiped the dust off, and for the first time in years he wept. Not the controlled tears of regret, but the broken sobs of a man realizing he had traded everything meaningful for nothing. Yet by morning he returned to his old ways. He called another girl, ordered another bottle, and pretended the night before had never happened. But the cracks were no longer cracks. They were gaping holes, swallowing everything he once held dear. Lust had carried Adewale through his youth, sweet and intoxicating. It had made him feel powerful, alive, untouchable. But now, in middle age, it began to sour. The women did not love him. His wife did not respect him. His children did not want him. Society no longer admired him. He had chased every woman, but in the process, he had lost the only people who truly mattered. And though he still told himself he was living the dream, a quiet voice in the back of his mind whispered the truth. The cost was far greater than the pleasure. The man who once had everything was slowly becoming a man with nothing. Time is a thief. It steals quietly at first. A strand of gray here, a wrinkle there. Then one day, you look in the mirror and realize youth has abandoned you completely. For Chief Adewale, the fall did not come all at once. It came slowly, like dusk creeping over the city of Lagos, dimming the light until only shadows remained. By the time he was in his late 50s, Adewale no longer turned heads in nightclubs. The same women who once giggled at his jokes now whispered behind his back. Some called him old cargo. Others laughed at how desperate he looked trying to keep up with younger men. He dyed his hair, bought tighter suits, and drove flashier cars, but none of it hid the truth. Age does not bargain, and lust cannot defeat time. The women who stayed close did so for money alone. Their eyes betrayed the emptiness of their affection. They laughed when his wallet opened, not when his heart tried to. Still, he refused to admit defeat. He clung to the illusion of relevance, throwing parties that grew smaller with each passing year. The Banana Island mansion, once alive with music and laughter, became a shell of itself. The grand halls stood empty, the chandeliers gathered dust, and the swimming pool reflected nothing but silence. He walked through the rooms at night, his footsteps echoing back at him like a reminder of loneliness. He would sometimes sit in the children's old bedrooms, running his fingers across the desks where homework had once been scribbled. Their posters were long removed, their laughter a memory. None of them visited. None of them called. He had wealth but no warmth, a house but not a home. Lego society is cruelly efficient in replacing its idols. New billionaires rose, younger, sharper, and hungrier. They built skyscrapers, drove newer cars, and attracted the same women who once clung to Adewale's arm. He was no longer the man at the center of every conversation. He was the man people used as an example. Don't end up like Chief Adewale. Women finished him. Business deals slipped through his fingers. His name, once a symbol of power, carried the stench of recklessness. Banks hesitated, partners withdrew, protégés avoided him. Respect, once lost, is rarely regained. One rainy season, Adewale fell sick. It was nothing dramatic at first, just fatigue, then headaches, then a persistent cough. But weeks turned into months, and the sickness deepened. He was admitted to a private hospital in Victoria Island. Nurses cared for him, but no family came. The bed beside him was always empty, not because he was alone in the ward, but because he was alone in the world. He picked up his phone countless times, scrolling through his contacts. He considered calling his children, but always hesitated. Pride held him back, or perhaps shame. Late at night, when the ward was silent, he whispered to himself, "Who will cry when I die?" The answer echoed in his mind. No one. In his weakened state, memories became sharper than reality. He remembered the first time he held his son, the first time his daughter called him daddy. He remembered his wife's laughter, soft and genuine, before it was replaced with silence. And then he remembered the women. Countless faces, countless names. He had chased them all, but none remained. They had moved on to younger men, richer men, or simply vanished into the endless city. He had traded his family for strangers who never loved him. He had exchanged loyalty for lust. The bitterness of that realization was heavier than his illness. When he was discharged, he returned to his mansion. But it was no longer a mansion, it was a prison. He struggled to climb the marble stairs, his breath short, his body weak. He sat for hours on the balcony, staring at the Lagos skyline. Once, those lights had represented victory, wealth, and pleasure. Now they mocked him, reminding him of a life squandered. The phone never rang. No children came. No wife returned. Even the women who once fought for his attention ignored his calls. There was nothing left to take from him. On one such night, with the city glittering below and the sound of the lagoon lapping in the distance, Adewale finally admitted the truth. Lust had been sweet in his youth, but now, in old age, it was bitter poison. He had spent his life chasing every woman, believing it was pleasure, believing it was proof of power. But in the end, he discovered a painful truth. Lust is fleeting, and it abandons you when you need companionship the most. Love, respect, and family, those were the treasures he ignored. And without them, wealth meant nothing. Adewale's story became a silent warning whispered across Lagos. Men spoke of him with pity, women with disdain. His children never forgave him, his wife never returned, and the city he once conquered forgot him. In his final years, Adewale was left with only memories and regrets. The man who chased every woman ended up with no one.